There are some stories you wish you'd never heard. Some things that creep into your mind late at night and refuse to leave. A lone trucker on an empty highway, seeing the same woman on the side of the road, miles apart. A family in their dream home, realizing someone has been inside long before they moved in. These aren't just stories, they happened, and they could happen to anyone, including you. Tonight, I have 4 disturbing, true horror stories that will make you rethink the shadows in your room, the footsteps outside your door, and the silence that isn't really silent at all. Before we begin, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely, because once you hear these stories, you'll never feel alone again. And if you love hearing terrifying true stories, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because sometimes the scariest things are the ones that are real. Now, let's begin. Do you ever get the feeling that something is watching you? Not in a casual way, not like a passing glance from a stranger, but something deeper, older, patient. The kind of presence that doesn't just watch, but waits. I never used to believe in that. Not until last fall. I loved hiking alone. It was my escape, my way to clear my head. Just me, the trees, and the endless trails stretching before me. There was something pure about it, something cleansing, at least. That's what I used to believe. That day, I had planned a short, solo hike in upstate New York, near the Catskills. A familiar trail, nothing extreme. The kind of path where you can lose yourself in thought and let the rhythm of your footsteps sync with the heartbeat of the forest. But something felt different. The air was thick, almost heavy. The usual chatter of the woods, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds was gone, swallowed by an unnatural stillness. It felt like the forest was listening, waiting. I ignored it. I kept walking, my boots crunching against the dirt path. But after a while I noticed something odd. The trail didn't look right. The trees here were different, older, twisted, their branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. I checked my phone. No service. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Faint, distant, but not mine. I stopped. They stopped. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just shifting shadows and thick underbrush. I swallowed hard and kept walking. Crunch, a half-second delay, like someone was matching my pace just slightly off. I walked faster. So did they. By now my heart was hammering. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, maybe another hiker. But then I heard it. A whisper, a low, rasping exhale right behind me. Not words, just breathe, ragged, labored. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing. Nothing but trees. And then I saw it, a figure, tall, motionless, half hidden behind a tree, watching me. No flashlight, no hiking gear, just standing there. My breath hitched. My body screamed at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, locked in a silent standoff with something that shouldn't be there. Then it shifted, not toward me, just adjusting, like it wanted me to know it was aware that I had seen it. That was enough. I ran. Harder than I ever had in my life. My lungs burned, my legs ached. But behind me, I heard them running too, not stumbling, not crashing through the underbrush, just a steady, deliberate sprint, fast, too fast. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I just ran. Minutes stretched into eternity. My body screamed for me to stop, but then headlights, a road, civilization. I stumbled onto the asphalt just as a car approached, the driver slamming on the brakes, staring at me in shock. Gasping, I turned back to the woods, and there was nothing. No figure, no footsteps, just the silent, watching trees. But the feeling never left. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, rolled down his window. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to tell him, to explain everything, but as I opened my mouth, I felt it again, the weight of unseen eyes. I glanced over my shoulder, back toward the trees. The dark void between the trunks stretched endlessly, a black maw that could swallow anything. And something moved. Not a deer, not an animal, a shadow, darting, fast, too fast for my mind to process. "Kid?" the driver asked again. "You sure you're okay?" I need to get out of here," I whispered. He nodded, unlocking the passenger door. I climbed in, my hands still trembling, sweat slicking my palms. As we drove away, I couldn't stop looking back. The forest blurred by, but I knew it was still there, watching. The ride back to town was silent. I kept expecting to see something in the side mirror, a shadowed figure chasing after us, but the road was empty. The old man dropped me off at a small gas station, and before he drove off, he hesitated. "You were on that old trail?" he asked. I nodded. He frowned. "I used to hike there too, until, well, let's just say you're not the first to come running out of those woods." I felt my stomach drop. "Did you ever see it?" His expression darkened. "Number and I never want to." With that, he drove off, leaving me standing under the flickering fluorescent lights of the gas station. I never went back to those woods, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with the feeling that something is still watching me. And I wonder, what if I had never made it out? Have you ever had that feeling that you're not alone? That prickling sensation at the back of your neck when the house is supposed to be empty? I have, and I'll never forget it. I was 16 when it happened. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone. It wasn't a big deal, I had spent nights alone before. Our neighborhood was quiet, safe. The kind of place where nothing ever happened. Or so I thought. That night I stayed up late watching TV. The hours slipped by, and before I knew it, it was almost 2 a.m. My eyes were heavy, my body sluggish with exhaustion, so I decided to head upstairs to bed. As I passed the front door, I did what I always did, double-checked the locks. Deadbolt, locked, chain, secured. Satisfied, I switched off the lights and started up the stairs. But just as I reached the halfway point, I heard it, a soft click, the unmistakable sound of a door unlocking. I froze, my foot hovering mid-step. My breath caught in my throat as I turned my head. The front door was wide open, not just unlocked, open. A yawning black void, the night air creeping inside, cold and wrong. A shiver ran through me, my skin crawling with an invisible touch. My mind scrambled for answers. Maybe I didn't latch it properly, maybe the wind. Then I saw it. A footprint, not mine. A dark, wet imprint on the hardwood floor, just inside the threshold. Someone had stepped inside. The realization sent ice through my veins. My shaking hands shot out, grabbing the door and slamming it shut. Deadbolt, chain. I even shoved a chair against it, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I bolted up the stairs and locked myself in my room. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every groan of the house made my pulse skyrocket. I held my breath at every distant sound, convinced that at any moment I'd hear footsteps in the hall. But the real horror came the next morning, when I checked the security footage. At 1:58 a.m., 2 minutes before I walked up the stairs, the camera showed a man standing at my front door. Not knocking, not moving, just standing there. At 2 a.m., the door unlocked from the inside, and at 2:01 a.m., he stepped inside. Then, static. The camera glitched for exactly 5 minutes. When it turned back on, he was gone. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry, no footprints leading away from the house. The police found nothing, no fingerprints, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind rattles the windows, I swear I hear it again. The deadbolt clicking open, and when I look at the door, sometimes, just for a split second, I see a shadow standing in the hallway, watching. One night, about a week later, I woke up with a start. Something wasn't right. The air in my room felt heavier, almost suffocating. I listened, heart pounding, straining to hear beyond the hum of my fan, and then a creak, software deliberate, from the hallway. My skin turned to ice. I reached for my phone, but as I moved, my bed frame groaned under my weight. The sound was small, barely audible, but in that moment, it felt deafening. And then, another creak, closer. I held my breath. My body was frozen, locked in place. I wanted to tell myself it was just the house settling, a trick of my imagination, but then I saw it, a shadow stretching beneath the crack of my bedroom door. It wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. Every hair on my body stood on end. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, my fingers fumbling against the switch. The moment the light flickered on, silence. The shadow was gone. I sat there, heart hammering, staring at the door for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I must have fallen asleep because when I opened my eyes again, morning light was creeping through my blinds. I hesitated before opening my bedroom door. The hallway was empty, the house silent once more. But as I stepped out, something caught my eye. The front door. Wide open, the chair I had pushed against it the night before. Moved aside, the locks still latched, but someone had been inside. I checked the security footage, my hands shaking as I rewound the feed. At exactly 3 a.m., the camera cut to static. When it came back, the door was open, and standing just inside the threshold was a figure, motionless, silent, head tilted slightly as if listening, as if waiting. Then, after several long seconds, it turned and walked away, not toward the door, deeper into the house. The feed cut out again, and when it returned, there was nothing. I used to do long-haul trucking, night drives, empty highways, hours of silence. It can get eerie, but you get used to it. This happened on a deserted stretch of highway in Arizona, a road cutting through miles of nothingness. It was around 2:30 a.m. and the only company I had was the glow of my headlights stretching into the dark. I was exhausted. I needed to pull over soon. But then, in the distance, I saw her. A woman, standing on the side of the road, barefoot, wearing a thin white dress that barely moved in the wind. Her dark hair hung loose over her shoulders, and she stood completely still, facing my truck. I slowed down. I had heard stories about people faking distress to ambush drivers, so I was cautious. But something about her didn't sit right. She didn't wave for help. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring. As my headlights washed over her, I got a better look at her face, her eyes. They were too wide, too focused, like she had been waiting for me. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I hesitated. What if she really needed help? I slowed down just enough to roll down my window a crack. "Mom, are you okay?" She smiled. Not a normal smile. It was too slow, too deliberate. And then she took a step toward the truck. That was all I needed. I slammed my foot on the gas, leaving her in the dust. My heart pounded as I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see her running after me. But she wasn't. She was still standing in the same spot, just watching. I drove for miles trying to shake the image from my head. Eventually, I spotted a small roadside diner and pulled in. My hands were shaking. I needed coffee. Inside, the place was mostly empty, just a tired-looking waitress and an old man sitting at the counter. I sat down and tried to shake the feeling of unease. After a moment, I turned to the old man and said, half joking, "You ever seen weird things on this highway?" He looked at me for a long second before speaking. "You saw her, didn't you?" I froze. The waitress, who had been pouring coffee, stopped mid-pour. She didn't say a word, just stared at me. The old man sighed, rubbing his temple. "She's been out there for years, hitching rides she never takes." I swallowed hard. "Who is she?" He shook his head. "No one knows. Some say she was a woman who died out there decades ago. Others say she's something older, but everyone who stops, they see her again." I felt my stomach drop. "Again?" He nodded. "She doesn't like being ignored. She finds you again." A cold chill ran down my spine. I didn't finish my coffee. I got back in my truck and drove without stopping until daylight. But here's the thing. That was 3 years ago. And last week, on a different route, 1,000 miles away, I saw her again. Same white dress, same wide eyes, standing on the side of the road, waiting. And this time, she smiled even wider. I didn't stop. I didn't even look at her for more than a second. I kept my eyes on the road, knuckles white against the wheel, heart hammering so hard I thought it might stop. I sped past, watching in the mirror, until she disappeared into the night. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that it wasn't real. But that night, as I pulled into a truck stop to rest, something felt wrong. I locked my doors, checked my mirrors, and tried to sleep. But just as I started to drift off, a noise sent ice through my veins. Tap, tap, tap. Knuckles against glass, slow, rhythmic, like someone was knocking just to see if I was awake. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, but my skin crawled as I realized the sound wasn't coming from the driver's side. It was coming from the passenger window. I turned my head, just a little, just enough to see. She was there, closer than ever before, her face nearly pressed against the glass, eyes locked onto mine, that same slow smile curling across her lips. She didn't speak. She didn't move. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath shallow, my body frozen in place. I didn't dare open them again until the sun started to rise, casting light through the windshield. When I finally looked, she was gone. I drove for hours, shaking, barely able to focus. I haven't seen her since. But every time I take a night route, every time I pass an empty stretch of highway, I wonder if she's waiting for me. And if the next time I see her, she won't just be watching. When my wife and I bought our first home, it was a dream come true. A quiet little house in the suburbs. A fresh start. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Until we started hearing the noises. They started small, scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. At first, I thought we had mice, so I set traps in the basement. But the noises kept happening, always at night. Then we started finding things out of place. Cabinets left open, small objects moved. My wife swore she'd put her keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them on the floor across the room. Once, I left my phone on the nightstand and found it in the bathtub the next morning. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. Then one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something moving inside the walls, not scratching, shuffling, like something was crawling through the vents. I got up, heart pounding, and followed the noise. It led me to the hallway closet. I hesitated. The air felt heavy, like something was standing on the other side of the door. Slowly, I reached for the handle, and the door creaked open on its own. The closet was empty, but there at the back was a small hatch leading to the crawl space. It was slightly open. My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone and used the flashlight to shine into the crawl space. The light hit something, a pair of eyes, wide, glassy, unblinking. Someone was in there. I stumbled back, slamming the closet door and locking it. My wife woke up to me barricading the hallway. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and called the police. They arrived within minutes. When they checked the crawl space, it was empty. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. But here's what still keeps me up at night. The officer pointed out something I hadn't noticed. The dust on the floor near the hatch had been disturbed, not like someone had been there that night, but like someone had been crawling in and out for weeks. The police never found anyone, but that wasn't the end of it. 2 nights later, we heard something new, whispering, faint, almost like a breath. It came from inside the walls, moving, traveling from room to room. We barely slept that night. I wanted to leave, but where would we go? Who would believe us? So we stayed. Then my wife saw it. She'd gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. She flicked on the light, and in the mirror just behind her, she saw something move. A reflection, shifting in the hallway. But when she turned, nothing was there. We stopped using the closet. We stuffed the crawl space hatch with furniture, nailed it shut. But the sounds continued. The faint tapping inside the walls, the low whispering at night. Then one evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. A figure, small, pale, hunched over, slipping into the darkened hallway. I leapt to my feet, but the hallway was empty. I checked every room, every locked door. My wife was asleep, the windows sealed. Then a sound. A soft creak, the closet door slightly ajar. Something had moved it. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I did something desperate. I tore open the crawl space with tools, with my bare hands. I pulled back insulation, ripped out old paneling, searching for answers. And then, I found it. Deep inside, near the back wall, I saw something wedged in the corner. A bundle of cloth. I pulled it free, my hands shaking, and the moment I unwrapped it, my stomach turned. Old, yellowed photographs. Faces. Dozens of them. Some scratched out, others warped with age. Children, women, men. All staring, their expressions frozen in time. And beneath them, a lock of hair, dried, tangled, tied with a piece of string. I dropped everything and stumbled out, gasping for air. My wife took one look at me and knew we had to leave. That night, we packed our bags and checked into a hotel. We put the house on the market the next morning. We never went back. Sometimes I look up the address. The listing changes hands often. No one stays for long. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear it in my dreams. A faint shuffling inside the walls. And I wonder, did we ever really find all the ways in? Some stories never really end. Some things never truly go away. So the next time you hear footsteps in an empty house, see a shadow move where it shouldn't, or get the feeling that someone's watching you, maybe you're right. If you made it this far, you're brave, or just curious. Either way, there are more stories waiting for you. Subscribe for more terrifying true tales and hit the notification bell, because you never know when the next story might be about you. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep.